My man is here right now. You look great, sir. I see you. I see you getting your stuff straight. You look fantastic. How you
Thanks.
doing this morning? You doing all right?
Yes, I'm. As well as the world allows anyone to be these days.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And just so the audience would know, this is Professor Richard Wolff. He's a professor of economic emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program um, in International Affairs of the New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work, a fantastic show, by the way, and host of the nationally syndicated show Economic Update. His latest book, The System is the Sickness: When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. And it is available with his other books, including Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism at democracyatwork.info. Professor, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jamal. It's always a pleasure, and I'm I'm always happy to learn that your show is on the air and that you're doing your thing because we need it more now than we ever have.
Oh, I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. Um, can I say that many MAGA members, many libertarians, many people who are on the conservative side that love your show have recently come out and say, we got him, Professor Wolff is wrong. Trump has saved the world. He has brought the US back. We are now strutting around the globe. We are once again the Galactus in economic sense because Trump has waged a tariff war with Mexico, China, Canada, and is about to do one with Europe. Explain to those people why you're not wrong, that America is declining, and that Donald Trump's tariff war is not saving the United States in a way that they may believe that this tariff war is saving the United States. Give me your take.
Okay, I think the best way to get at this is to remind people about a little history. We don't teach history real well in the United States. Maybe it's because we're a relatively young country. At least the white people part of it is relatively young, given what we did to the people who were here for a long time. But put that aside, we're relatively new as countries go. We are maybe to be excused. But here's the history we ought to remember. Every previous empire, the Greek, the Roman, the Persian, the Russian, the Chinese, all of them went up and then they went down. And when they went down, something was very common. They didn't want to face it. They couldn't quite admit it. They had gotten so used to the ride up, which is fun, that they couldn't imagine that the good times would ever stop. And therefore, we have what psychologists call denial, a series of behaviors, typically by the leaders, in which they act out like, oh, we're not declining, we're going on, and it's going to be forever. Look, it's never been true before, which means you ought to start out being skeptical if you're surrounded by people who start telling you something like what you just said. Oh, we were going down, but now we have reversed it. No, you haven't. You've got an actor up there, and boy, he's good at it. I'll give him that. Acting it out. He's smiting the Canadians. It's like the Bible. He's smiting the Mexicans. He's lots of hand waving, but it isn't changing anything. If true, if we see what's coming in the way of retaliation, what the Canadians have decided to do, what the Mexicans are clearly willing and able to do, what the Europeans are beginning to do. We are in the early stages of a blowback to Mr. Trump's first 2 months that's going to be as big a headline as anything Mr. Trump did. Let me remind you just of a few possible examples. The Canadians depend on selling electricity to the United States. The United States, many parts of the United States, particularly in the Midwest, depend on for electricity, which they need for everything, from Canada. Okay, if you really rupture this game, if you really squeeze the Canadians and they decide to retaliate, which already they have the political consensus in their country to do, probably what you're going to see is backtracking by the United States, or if that doesn't happen, the Canadians are going to have to sell their electricity somewhere else. And I got two examples, China and Europe. That's not strengthening the United States if that happens. Quite the contrary. And the same is true of Mexico. If you produce things in the United States, you're going to need labor here in the United States. We face two realities here. Number one, we are not producing, reproducing our population. In other words, the birth rate in the United States, and this has been true for years, is declining. We have made the mass of women leave the household, which is where they used to be, and go into the workplace where they are now, because the family's economics couldn't survive if they didn't. Okay? Those women and men now cannot, given the wages they get, they can't afford to have children, and they're not having them. They're making that decision more and more and more. We are not reproducing ourselves. Well, you could get by for a while if you replace the babies we're not producing with immigrants. But we live in a crazy country which is doing the opposite. It's deporting young people who are childbearing age, sending them back into Central America or wherever they came from. And therefore, we're in an economic crunch, and that's going to make the cost of labor higher. Well, that's nice for the workers who get a higher wage. I'm happy for them. But it means that the cost of everything in the United States is going to be going up. We're facing inflationary pressures of a major sort. The whole rest of the world is not going to buy goods from America because they're too expensive. And that means we're going to lose jobs from the people who used to produce what we used to be able to sell abroad. I could go on, but it's very easy to show that the American economic situation is very precarious. Only by make-believe does this go away. Now, proof of it, Jamar. Here's the proof. The United States has 6 major economic allies. Together, they comprise what you can read about in the newspaper, the so-called G7, the group of 7. That's the United States and the following 6 other countries: Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. Okay? That used to be the powerhouse, the wealth of the world concentrate. That's why that's the world that went and colonized everybody else, carved up Africa and Asia and Africa with the delusion that they could hold on to the whole world, a delusion that is now forever gone, except in the minds of a few really backward folk who haven't even given up that illusion yet. Okay, they used to be the center of the world's wealth and power. They aren't anymore. There is another wealth and power concentration. It's built not around the United States, but around the number one competitor of the United States, which is the People's Republic of China. And there's even more make-believe in the United States about all of that, which people don't want to look at. China is a power. Everything that we produce in the United States now, the Chinese can do, in many cases, better and cheaper than we can. I'm going to give you just one example because it's big in the world. Who's popular in the media today? Elon Musk. Why? Because he developed, we're told, the electric car and the electric truck, Tesla, and all of that. And he has made a lot of money off of it, no question. But right now in the world, the best electric car and truck by quality and the cheapest is made by something called the BYD Corporation in China. It's not Mr. Tesla who's done the great work. That's why Mr. Tesla's stocks have collapsed over the last several weeks as the statistics come in that the world is shifting to BYD and leaving Tesla way back in the dust. Whoa. Whoa. I mean, what could be more central to modern capitalism than the automobile? And that's being dominated by China. If you go to Europe right now, France, Germany, Italy, what you see on the road are lots and lots of BYD cars. We don't have them here because there's, from Mr. Biden, not from Mr. Trump, from Mr. Biden, a 100% tariff against the Chinese electric car industry. So we say to Americans, you could buy the best quality electric car for $30,000. But if you do, you're going to have to pay Uncle Sam a 100% tariff. That means another 30,000. You give 30,000 to China to get the car, then you got to pay Uncle Sam the tariff, because that's all it is the tax, another 30. So it costs you 60, which you don't do because you can get a Tesla or a GM or a Ford for less. That's called protection. You know who does that? A society that can't compete anymore. Oh, they'll tell you so the Chinese are cheating. My guess is they probably are. And if you think American companies don't cheat, well, then I don't know. You need the kind of help I can't offer you. Then you live in a level of make-believe that ought to worry your mother, your father, your sister, and your brother. I can't help you. The realities of economics, here they are. China and its allies, known as the BRICS, BRICS, they now produce roughly 35% of the world's output. The G7, that's the United States and its allies, they produce about 28% of the world's output. In other words, case closed. It's no longer a question, can they become as powerful as the United States? They already are, and they have been. And the gap between the two of them is getting wider as we speak. You know, it's over. The United States empire is over. As are the other. We don't have to be ashamed. Every other empire. Let's remember, the United States rose because the British Empire fell apart. Well, it's our chance to go down. And I really mean this as an American citizen, born and raised and worked here all my life. I'm not happy about it. I understand that it's difficult for a society to go down. That's why the history is helpful, because we can see it in all the other empires. But the intelligent thing is not to pretend it isn't happening. The intelligent thing is to say, okay, we had a good run. We are still one of the richest and most powerful countries in the world. So let's sit down with our counterparts, our Chinese brothers and sisters, all human beings living on this planet, and let's work out a way that we can all live together. There's room, there's possibility, there's plenty of smart people on their side and on this side to work all this out. And the alternative, to be at each other all the time, keeps us only this far from the kind of nuclear fight which we will all regret for the few minutes of life we might still have.
Agreed. I agree with everything you said. I just want to preface what I'm about to say with that. I think the Trump administration would say, look, we accept it. We accept that China is trying to get out the barn. We accept all of this stuff, but we are not going to acquiesce to this. We're going to do everything in our power to bring back American companies and businesses. Our tariffs are designed in order to try to get companies to say it's cheaper to build it in America. We have 3 companies, whatever that number is, that has decided to come back to the States, meaning they're looking at tariffs as a way of trying to effectively drag companies back into America in order to bring jobs back into the United States. Does that work? I mean, has the economy's gotten, has globalism gone so far and too far where that is no longer on the table as an option, that those companies are not coming back? They don't look at it in those terms. Give me your take on that. I mean, is the Trump administration just fundamentally getting this wrong in regard to the scale and power for America to do this around the world?
Yes, they're fundamentally getting it wrong, but not because they aren't, smart people or committed. I'm not in. They are. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Here's the problem: you cannot control. Nobody can. It's not their fault. You cannot control all the consequences of your acts. You have to have a certain humility. You can't do it. You can't promise to the American people what you just summarized very well, that I'm going to do these tariffs and trade wars and we're going to get all the jobs. This is the kind of fairy story that works if you're talking to a 4-year-old who's having trouble getting to sleep, and you tell them a story about the lovely fairy who came on the beautiful pony, and everybody had a picnic and ice cream, and by that time the 4-year-old's asleep, and you've accomplished. And no one expects the story to kind of hang together. It doesn't really matter. But what Mr. Trump is doing, and it's going to come back and bite him in a very tender part of his anatomy, right? He's promising things. He can't control that. I'll give you just 2 or 3 examples. If you put a tariff, and by the way, a tariff is just a tax. Nobody should be hung up on the word. Tariff is just a name we give to a tax on things imported into a country. That's all. Nothing more than that. If you put a tax, it means that for all Americans, the thing that comes in now costs us more because we got to pay for that thing. Plus, we got to give Uncle Sam the tax he put on it. Okay. You know what that's going to do? It's going to make us buy fewer. We're going to buy fewer, let's say, French wine because there's a tax on it. And that tax doesn't apply to California wine. So you will go in a liquor store, and instead of picking up the bottle from France, you'll walk 3 feet further and pick up the bottle from California because it didn't go up. Okay, now, 2 things happen which all of economics teaches. Number one, the California wine producers are going to rub their hands together and say, oh, great. Now that the cost of French wine has gone up because they have to pay a tariff on it, we can jack up the price of our California wine and still get people to buy it because it'll be cheaper than what they have to pay for the French one. So one of the results is often inflation. Poor Mr. Trump. He got into office in part because Mr. Biden presided over an inflation. If he does the same, it's going to be happy field day for the Democrats to do to Trump what he did to them. He can't control that, Mr. Trump. He ought to be really careful, but he's not being it. Here's another example. Let's stay with our French example. I'm going to hit the French with a tariff on wine. Ha, ha, ha. Well, the French are not going to sit there with their fingers up their nose while he does this. There's going to be a tremendous pressure by the wine producers of France, who are very powerful because that's a very important item in the French economy. They're going to go to their president, Mr. Macron, who's got the courage, political courage of a small mouse. And they're going to go to him and they're going to say, hey, do something. And what is Mr. Macron going to do? Well, he's going to do what Mr. Trump did. He's going to hit America with a tariff. For example, there's countries already that have been putting tariffs on American bourbon.
Yep.
Bourbon, bourbon whiskey is an export of the United States, and an important one. The United States is the only place that makes bourbon, and bourbon has become a popular drink in many parts of the world. So that produces a lot of jobs for Americans who grow the thing and who distill it into whiskey and put it in the bottle and ship the bottle and advertise all of that. All those people's jobs are in jeopardy because the rest of the world is not going to buy bourbon if it costs too much more because the local countries are retaliating. Mr. Trump can't control the retaliation. Look at what's been going on the last 3 weeks. He puts a tariff on. Oh my God, a day later, they retaliate. He said, okay, I'll take mine off, but you got
Yeah.
to take yours. Last thing, if you're a businessman, and I work with those folks all the time, if you're a businessman or woman and you're in charge of a company, let's say you're producing automobile parts in Mexico, and that's a big business, producing automobile parts in Mexico and then shipping them into the United States. If Mr. Trump puts a tariff, that means the price of the carburetor or the wheel assembly or whatever it is that comes from Mexico is going to go up, because when you import it, you got to pay this tax to Uncle Sam, the tariff. Okay, so now the idea is, gee, we don't want to lose the business, so we're going to move the factory from Mexico and move it across the border into Texas, because then it's only a few miles, and we produce in Texas. We don't have to pay a tariff. No one has to pay a tariff because it's produced in the U.S. That's the idea. See, make jobs in. But wait a minute, it is extremely expensive to move a factory. You have to move the machinery. You have to find a place. You have to find a whole new set of workers. That takes years, and it's a huge expense. No company wants to undertake that expense if they can't be sure that this tariff will really stick and be the reality. But you can't do it. Mr. Trump, look at him. One day he's doing it, the next day he's taking it off. Nobody in their right mind is going to undertake a big expense under that level of uncertainty. So here's what's happening. And it's not just about the companies that have activities in other countries. All across the American economy, the reaction to Mr. Trump's first 2 months in office is that the level of uncertainty is bringing us a recession. We're going to have a recession this year. More and more people believe it, myself included, because the uncertainty of Mr. Trump's behavior, the uncertainty of not knowing what retaliations will be undertaken by what countries, in what size, at what time. You don't know any of that, so you hold up. And when you hold up, then your plans to hire 50,000 Americans over here is put on hold. And your idea of building a factory over there is put on. You don't know enough and can't be sure enough to risk it. The vice president of X company is not going to risk his reputation, his future of moving up in the company by making a decision based on a wobbly president like this one. Yeah. So you're looking at Mr. Trump not understanding the limits of what he can do, promising the moon, getting a lot of people. Wouldn't it be great if we had more jobs? Sure, it would. But you can't keep riding. That's like the old joke, when you can't afford gas, you drive your car on the fumes. All right, nice idea, but it doesn't work very long, It gets you stuck out there on the road, and then no one's going to come pick you up. Mr. Trump, at this point, and I say this, I'm not a supporter of his, but I'm not a particular enemy of his. For me, Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump are equally unattractive as leaders. Put that aside, I don't think he can survive what he's doing. He's going to have to change fairly drastically what he's doing, because this is economic craziness, and all of it, I think, is explained, to go back to what I said at the beginning,
to now.
We're, as a nation, we can't face the reality that our empire is declining, that our system is now having to compete for the first time in a century with a serious competitor, which is China. The Soviet Union worried us militarily, but economically they were irrelevant. They were way too small, way too poor. It was never a serious economic and political threat. It was militarily once they acquired nuclear weapons, which is why they are the nuclear power par excellence today. They realize that's what gives them their standing in the world. The United States has to come to terms with this. Bullying and showboating, it's not going to work.
Last question. I get the sense that his objective in the trade war is not to have a trade war with China, if that makes sense. Meaning, it's not like Trump came in and says, okay, I'm putting 100% tariffs on everything coming in China. He didn't do that. And there's even reporting that he wants to effectively have a deal with Xi Jinping, that he wants to meet and talk with him and come to some kind of terms. What do you think he wants from China in this? Because you're right, the horse is out the barn. The U.S. is freaked out by the economic might of China and the military might of Russia. And the fact that they've combined themselves with all of these other countries, including adjacent countries like Saudi Arabia, for God's sake, another oil producer.
Right.
And Indonesia is apparently coming on board. Like
Indonesia have already joined. Yep.
So all of these countries have come together saying, we want something different. And again, we want a new world access in the way the world works. We want another choice in this. We don't want this hegemonic control of the economic system in the way that the U.S. and the West has run it. If he indeed wants negotiations with China and Xi Jinping, what do you think he wants out of those negotiations? And do you think he can get what he wants in order to prevent this kind of nonsense that's happening between these two powerhouses?
Well, I think it's a long shot, but he might. If you're right, Jamal, and you may be, if you're right, that he understands what we've been talking about, and that this may be the last chance the United States has. Because if you see the decline of the U.S. relative to the rise of China and the BRICS, and let me remind people in this conversation, the United States population is 4.5% of the people of this planet. China and the BRICS together is 55% of the people on this planet. We are not, and if you put the G7, you put the United States with Canada, Japan, Europe, okay, maybe 20%, maybe, of the world. But the BRICS and the China are way ahead. I mean, now, once upon a time, it didn't matter because that part of the world was so poor and so much colonized that they weren't an independent force. That's forever gone. That's over. Colonialism is dead virtually everywhere except in Palestine, as we can see, and maybe in Greenland if Mr. Trump snatches it, right? But other than that, these things are dead. Yeah. All right. That changes everything. If Mr. Trump understands that, then my answer to your question is he's going to try to negotiate the best deal he can so that the United States survives in this new world. It can be a powerful country, it can be a big country, it can be a wealthy country, but it cannot do what it used to do for 100 years. Look, we lost the war in Vietnam. We lost the war in Afghanistan. We lost the war in Iraq. That's the truth. We're going to lose many more. We're losing it in Ukraine.
Yeah.
People are living in a fake make-believe. That's, if you're right, and I hope you are, that's what he's going for. Cut a deal with Xi Jinping. Give him and that part of the world the chance, which is all they really ask, that they can develop a standard of living for their people similar to what exists in the Western world. They've been denied that for 300 years. They ain't gonna sit by and be denied anymore. That's, if he doesn't give them that, then there'll be no deal. Yeah. So that's the situation. That's the reality. Now, Mr. Trump will, if he cuts a deal, he's smart enough to know you better shape it because of the American people as though it's a great victory for the United States. It won't be, but that's what Hollywood is for, to put the face on it.
Yeah. he would come out and say, "This is a fantastic deal." I mean, he did it with Canada and Mexico, right? Best deal
Absolutely.
on the planet.
Yes.
And then someone gets in 3 years later. This deal is horrible.
Yeah.
You need to change this deal.
Right.
Professor Richard Wolff. He is professor of economic emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor at the graduate program in international affairs at the New School University in New York City. He is founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated program, Economic Update, a fantastic program, by the way. His latest book, System is the Sickness When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism at Democracy at Work.info. Professor, where can people find you, by the way?
Easiest place is to go to our major website, Democracy at Work, all one word, democracyatwork.info. Everything is found there, and there's no charge.
You are fantastic. Thank you
All
for
right.
this.
Thank
Have
you,
a good one.
Jamar.
Be safe.
Take care.
All right.